Greetings, my guzzlers. What the fuck? How am I meant to drink my beer? Bloody fangs getting away. Can't have that. There is a purpose to the fangs, to the bat. For tonight, we are going to dine before meeting the Count Dracula. So, I may need to partake in some Camden Ale, Kaleidoscope, hearty. Sorry, this ain't the session IPA. This is the strong one. For tonight, we are cooking a dish local to the area prior to our visit to the Count later. We are going to have Chicken Paprikash served with a side order of spatzel or something like that, noodles. So, let us begin, my little vampire friends. For this dish, we want some chicken. And what I'm going to do to start with, I'm going to take a tablespoon of salt, which seems a lot of salt. But that don't matter. Now we'll mix all that in later. But I'm just going to put that tablespoon of salt over that chicken and set it to one side. And then we want some onion. Now, about 2 medium onions, although that's a bit small and that's a bit bigger than a medium, so we're going to add them too. Got a new knife block. The other one was beginning to be a pain in the arse. So, we are going to obviously peel these onions and we want to chop them up, sort of finely chopped. So, pardon me, I have had some beer earlier. No, I haven't. I've only had the one. So, Chicken Paprikash. Well, it's mentioned, although it's not solely from the book, it is mentioned in the original Bram Stoker. Dodgy bit on that onion. Dracula. Now Dracula, I must admit I haven't read it, but it's written as like a journal by one Jonathan Harker, and apparently the story is all written as if he's like writing in his journal about his experiences. And in one of of his entries, prior to getting to meet the Count Dracula, I've been to Dracula's castle actually. That's an aside. Anyway, he has a meal, and he writes to his fiancée Mina, describing this meal. And he's basically describing chicken paprikash, but he calls it chicken hendel. So I'm just going to clear away this peeling, and then I'm going to finely chop up that onion. And then, oh shit, I need a drink. We'll be ready to start the cooking. Now my onion is prepared. Then you want a pan. You want a pan with a lid. He was getting a bit frisky then, he's after me beer. And then you want to put into that. Now, I've got a choice here. You could have lard. You could have, what do they call it? Schmaltz or something, which is like a fat. Or if you want to be a bit more healthy, 2 tablespoons of vegetable oil. This is what we're obviously doing. We're not having lard. Now we want to get that nice and hot. And when that's like really hot, we're going to chuck that onion in there. Oh bugger, I forgot. So, this is a Hungarian dish. Okay. Oh, that felt like that was moving off the top of my head. It's a Hungarian dish, and it's no good. I'm going to have to put my glasses on. Can't see properly. And it's apparently very common and very popular and very well known in Hungary. And the name, obviously, Paprikash, is derived from paprika. Possible you want the sweet one. I've got a mixture of sweet and smoked in there, which I don't know how well you can tell that. There's 2 different, slightly different colours in there. One's a tablespoon of smoked, tablespoon of straightforward sweet paprika. Now, when Jonathan Harker mentions it, he mentions it gave him quite a thirst, and so the assumption is he had like the spicy version. There was a bit of onion peel on there. I've just got rid of that. He had the spicy version, hence gave him a bit of thirst. You know, give me a fucking beer. I need something. But it's a way. It's a bit like a goulash. It's a bit like that, you know, that sort of dishes. But essentially, it's just onion, chicken, some stock, a little bit of flour to thicken it up, obviously that paprika, and some sour cream. Okay, so it's not got all your other like potatoes, things like that in it. So, as soon as that is hot and steam, don't know if that is steam, it's a wheel, isn't it? We're going to chuck in that onion. Actually, it's not that hot. It looked like it was shimmering there. Just catch that bloody knife. And then we're going to add a teaspoon of salt. Okay, we're going to add a teaspoon of salt. That teaspoon? That's half a teaspoon. Teaspoon of salt. And we're now going to cook that for about 10 minutes. Okay, I'll give it a little bit of a sort of stir. Oh, there's a bit of peel there, you little git. And we want to cook this gently for about 10 minutes. And then I'll tell you a little bit more about chicken paprika. These want to run about 10 minutes. Okay, when I start getting a bit of colour to them. Now I told you you're going to want 2 tablespoons of paprika. You want 500 ml of chicken stock. I buy these stock pot. You know, like they come in little plastic things. They never seem. I put boiling water on them, stir it. They just don't want to mix in. They will do once they get in there, I'll tell you. You want a tablespoon of oil, and you want 300 grams, approximately, of sour cream. Okay. And obviously your chicken. Now, the recipe, there is a recipe, calls for like, you know, you take your whole chicken and you cut it all up into bits. We've got mini chicken fillets, mainly because we had them going spare in the freezer. I don't want to get rid of them. Now, obviously, have as much chicken as you would want. This is sort of been worked out for 2 of us, but bear in mind we are rather generous with our portions. Okay, so I can't remember how much chicken I've got there. I've taken out the packet. But anyway, you know what I do. So 1830. this recipe first appeared in a bit of bloody peel there. Where's it gone now? Lost it. First appeared in a cookbook, written one. The Hungarian National Cookbook, written, like I say, in 1830 for Hungarian housewives. And it talks about getting a chicken, chopping it up, cooking it in lard. Remember I said lard, but we don't do it in lard. Adding paprika. In this case, this recipe says allspice, onion, and then you just stew it until it all goes a bit yellow. So we're not actually using that exact recipe. It was actually taken up by the Jews of Hungary for a Sabbath dish, and also in Czechoslovakia. So it's not just stuck with Hungary, but I'm getting hungry for another beer. We might be mixing these tonight. So like I say, this was Kaleidoscope from Camden Brewery. What should we have next? Fuck off, you're not getting any. Now, I sort of went out and come back, and so some of the onions started to catch a little bit. Well, not burn, but catch a little bit. But we are getting a nice golden colour. So at this point, turn up the heat. And you need to turn the heat off when you add the paprika, because if you're not careful, you'll burn it, and that won't be pleasant. So obviously this isn't a dish that the Count would eat, because we all know what his diet was of. And like I say, this was as Jonathan Harker, call that and, why is that and what? No, it's only a little burn on it. Was travelling to Transylvania, on his way to meet the Count at his castle in Transylvania, where I've been. There you go, there's that bit of bloody peel. Is it peel? Perhaps not. Now, at that time, Transylvania was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And so as a result, he actually refers to it in his journal, because he says, I must get this recipe for you, Mina. You're going to really love it. It's paprika Händel, because Händel is a German word apparently for chicken. Right, so now that is all mixed in. At this point, we're going to put the heat back on, and we're going to chuck in that chicken. Okay, and we want to, at this point, make sure that that chicken gets all nicely, get back in there, you little shit, coated. Wow, that is hot. I don't know why that one's hot. Oh, that one's hot. We want to get the chicken all thoroughly coated, and we're just sort of going to spread that out, turn this down a little bit, and I'm just going to cook it for a few minutes, turning it over, and you can see like where the bits that have been in contact with the surface of the pan, you know, they're sort of going whitish, if you like. So once we've got our chicken sort of like that, so that's why you need to keep turning it, particularly when you've got this amount of miniature breast fillet. Breast fillet. Count might like that, although he was a neck man really, not a breast man, wasn't he? But I don't think he minded. It was what he got out of the body that counted. What I could tell you about Dracula. But before I do, if I can be bothered, there was a famous ship, which you've probably never heard of, and I'd never heard of it, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. And we're talking right up to date now, more or less. 1973, 74. It used to sail across the Great Lakes, Canada. I think that is Great Lakes from Canada, I think, not in America. Wait, steady on, mate, steady on. And apparently, this chicken paprikash was a favourite meal amongst the sailors on the ship. But the reason it's sort of famous, because I thought, oh, I've never heard of this ship before, is because it actually sank in one of the Great Lakes. I don't know which one, can't remember. But they're very, very deep. And the wreck was eventually discovered. But that's actually not the reason it sank. But yeah, it was a favourite dish amongst them. So I'm just going to give that a few more minutes, and then you're going to be wanting your stock. Right, that's had a couple of minutes, a few turns. We're on medium heat, and we're just going to chuck in now that chicken stock, and just going to mix that in. Well, it don't really need a lot of mixing, does it? And at this point, we're going to cover it. Oh, I'll get to use that. Stain that now. The 3D printed spoonless, so don't make a mess of it. Now we're going to cook this in there for about 30 minutes, and every 10 minutes or so, hang on, I need a beer. No, you're not having a beer, you're a bat, you don't drink beer. No, you don't. No, you don't. Well, if you do, you ain't having any of mine. Piss off. So every 10 minutes or so, give it a little stir. So, you're going to want your sour cream, about 300 grams, 300 mils, and a tablespoon of flour at the end of that cooking stage. Okay. Now, Count Dracula. Possibly based on that nasty bit of work, Vlad the Impaler. That beer's going down well. Of course, I've only had the one. Now, actually, I should point out, by the way, so this is similar in a way, but the recipe I'm following is not the one in the cookbook I just mentioned. In fact, this is from a cookbook or a recipe actually 5 years after the story Dracula was written. And I've got this one from old Max Miller, Tasting History. When he recently did this dish, and he uses this recipe from 1892. Basically it says, put a piece of fat the size of a large egg into a pot. When the fat is hot, add 2 finely chopped onions, which we do, a tin spoonful, whatever that is, of fine red paprika, and immediately add chicken. Salt it, pour on half a litre of water, cover and stir in off and let it simmer for half an hour, which is what we're doing in a minute. Meanwhile, take care that it does not boil to pieces. Well, I don't think there's much chance of that happening. I just checked it. Excuse me, it's Camden beer. Definitely Camden beer. Yes, it's the beer. No, you're not having it. When the chicken is tender, prepare a gravy thickening with 3 decilitres. He was making for a lot of people, this recipe. A very good sour cream and a small spoon of flour, which we're going to be doing shortly. Well, not shortly, in about 20 minutes. Pour this into the chicken broth, stir it well and boil together. Serve it on a long platter surrounded by egg barley or galushka dumplings. Well, we're making something very similar to these egg things. We're making spätzle. We're serving it with that. Oh, my one beer might need to miraculously refill itself. By the way, we're not going to do the spätzle because when we add the flour mix, it's going to take another 20 minutes. So during that stage, we'll make our spätzle. Still got about 5-10 minutes or so to go on that. But we're going to start preparing the flour cream mix that's going to go in there. Now my one beer has miraculously turned into another type of one beer. And this is another Camden one. This is Camden Easy Hazy IPA. Another quite a strongish one. This is about 5%. I think the first one I had 5.6. Anyway, let's get rid of that can. In recycling, got to be responsible. Pardon me. And what we're going to need here is a small bowl. Let's get me this out of the way. And into that, I was going to mix it in here, but there's not enough room. So like I say, about 300 grams or 300 mils of sour cream. You could use creme fraiche if you want, creme fraiche. That makes me think perhaps I should do a South Park episode. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you don't watch enough South Park. Creme fraiche. And into that, we're going to mix that 1 tablespoon of just ordinary plain flour. Okay. So the flour is going to act as a bit of a thickening agent. Okay. So that's mixed in there. I can get rid of that. I can get rid of that. I can get rid of some of this. What we'll do is, before we chuck that in there, we're going to temper it, if you like, by using some of that sauce. Just presumably so it don't split. Oh, hark at him now, talking about splitting. What, you been on Bake Off? Now, because we're serving this with spätzle, for the final cooking stage, which is about 20 minutes, so you have to be able to that in, you're going to want a pan of boiling water with a bit of salt in it, deep pan, and we're going to cook our spätzle. We're going to prepare our spätzle and start cooking it in that final cooking stage. Oh, that's warm on there. So, Dracula, based on Vlad the Impaler, who apparently used to impale his victims on stakes. There is a lot of myth, a lot of perhaps made up stuff. Some of it may or may not have been true, but apparently he used to have banquets, and he used to surround outside, and he used to surround the tables with his stakes of impaled humans on. And so his guests could dine while watching these people dying whilst impaled on these stakes. Well, that's true, who knows? I've been to one of his castles. I say one of his castles because there is a little bit of dispute as to which one was Vlad the Impaler's. The one I went to was a bit near Bucharest. Well, that was a story and a half. That was back in when Romania, as it was then, as is now even, Transylvania was part of Romania, very communist, very weird, very, very weird. But anyway, I digress. So I've moved that over to that burner because we're going to use this one in a minute to our spätzle. So there's our flour and what's name mix. So I'm just going to grab a ladle full of that hot liquid. We're going to put that in there. mix that in. And then I might just add another one. Now, we don't necessarily want that anymore. And at this point, you notice I removed the lid. Oh shit, splash that. That went on my finger. We're now just going to tip that into there. I did keep splashing this earlier. And you're going to watch that with a paprika. I don't know how well it stains. But obviously you don't want that everywhere, do you? So, that's our final bit of that done. Apart from, obviously, the bit where we're now just going to cook this off. So I'm just going to stir that in gently so I don't splash it everywhere. Oh, bear in mind, by the way, the original recipe talked about using a whole chicken. So it'll be skin on, bone in. These are chicken breast fillets, so they're not even a whole breasts. They were at one point, but they've been cut up. No skin on, no bone in. So actually you can cut back the cooking time a little bit. So now I've got that mixed in, what we're going to do is that we're going to set that for about 20 minutes. May not take that long. We're just going to let that simmer away, like I say, for about 10 minutes, essentially until that sauce has thickened up, and then it will be ready to serve. And I'm sure the Count will be more than willing to sit and watch you dine upon what might be your last meal before he dines on his. I mean, in the story of Dracula, Jonathan Harker almost ends up a victim of the 3 vampire women in Dracula's service, you know? When they come across him and they're about to make a meal of him, as it were. When Dracula intervenes and says, "Oi, I'm doing business with him. You can't have him yet, mate." He was Yorkshire. Well, he weren't. But this is in Whitby, in Yorkshire. And he says to them, "You can have him later. You can't have him now. I've got business to make sure he does, because he's bringing documents. Got to do all that. Got to sign it all. Oh, by the way, oh no, that's spatula. I forgot what I'm doing there." He said, "But once our business is concluded, I'll give them to you. But in the meantime, here's a little present for you." And gives him this little bag of something wriggling inside. Probably a baby. Anyway, like I say, I'll set a time, yeah, about 20 minutes. Just keep your eye on it. Start stirring it. And let's make our spatzel. So, like I say, we're going to serve this with quite a traditional accompaniment. Now in Hungary, these are known as knockadil or nokadil or something like that. But in German, essentially spatzel or spatzen. And it's a type of egg noodle or pasta. So I'm making about 2 servings worth. So I've got 3 tablespoons of, excuse me, that's that beer talking. 3 tablespoons of milk. I'm going to add 1 egg into that. Just get rid of that. And then I've got about half a cup. I couldn't be bothered to calculate what it was. Half a cup of flour. And then you can use cayenne pepper, or in my case, I'm using a little bit of paprika again. So, hang on now. Now you can notice over here, my dish here is nicely simmering. Just give that a little stir. And what we want to do is then add a generous tablespoon of sour cream. And that is our mixture. Let me just get that in the fridge out of the way for our spatzel. Now, unlike most pastas, this wants to be almost like a batter, because we're going to be passing it through some small holes, if you like. Now, it wants to be runny enough that it will pass through something the size of these things, this cheese grater. If you've got a colander, my colander's got quite tiny holes, they're too small. They want to be about this size. Okay, so I'm going to use my cheese grater. It wants to be thick enough that, let me just turn that heat down a bit. You don't just pour straight through. Basically, you want to better put it in there. It's going to be fun with that. Trying to get it in there and spoon it through so you get little bits fall off. So it needs to be thick enough that it will do that. And I've got a feeling that might be a little bit on the runny side. So I'm just going to whisk in a little bit more flour, which is quite permissible. And on the other hand, if you made it too thick, you can add a little bit more milk. All right. So I'm just going to get that to the right consistency. I've got that pan coming up to the boil. Once it's boiled, I'm going to give it a good pinch of salt. I've had a little swap round, mainly because if you remember, this is my little burner, and with the big pans it takes forever. So I've just swapped them over. This on the low simmer, and it's simmering well. But our pan of boiling water just coming at a boil. So at this point, I'm going to give it a generous pinch of salt. As the pasta queen, Her Majesty, would say, add the salt when it's boiling, not to begin with. I know it weren't quite boiling, but we're getting there. Now, here is our batter. Now, this is going to be fun because, like I say, we want holes about that size. Just going to turn that down a fraction. And the idea being, we take some of that batter, and it's got to be the right consistency. But when we put it in there, oh, I didn't want to do that. We're now going to try and force it through our cheese grater, so it goes through in like little lumps, if you like. You can see it dropping off there. And then that wants to cook for about 3 minutes in that boiling water. When it's ready, it should, I'll turn it down a bit more, rise to the surface. Okay. Now, spatzel go back to the 18th century. Although it's possible from medieval drawings and illustrations, it may have sort of existed before then, but who knows? Because obviously, you know, a lot of times, certainly back then, they never really told you an awful lot about recipes. Certainly never told you quantities and things like that. But it's an Alsatian or a Swabian word. Essentially translates as little sparrows, and that's meant to be sort of representative of the shape. Now, sometimes, probably like these in here, you fuck it all up and the shapes don't look anything like little sparrows. In which case, they're called a raven or little storks, or black horses, or nightingales, grandfather or eagle. Apparently it's all meant to represent the fact that it's a spatula that was the wrong shape. Don't quite know why they saw all them names, but there you go. That's what they say. Now some of them are starting to rise up. Some are just sitting there on the bottom. Generally nowadays, well, I say nowadays, more recent times, they consider more of a festive food. But it's one of those foods that is now. Oh, another one just popped up. Definitely don't relate to sparrows to me. But it's one of those EU protected products. That was 2012. And by the way, that one beer, well, I've only had one beer, is now the Squeezy from Camden. That's a 3.4% alcohol. So it's quite a low alcohol, I say low alcohol, quite low alcohol. Now, when these are cooked, these spätzle, what you want to do is fish the buggers out. Now, sometimes, like I say, that's when they float to the surface. Apart from that one, which I wanted to scoop. Sometimes he's just eaten as they are with melted butter. There's some of our cooked spätzle. Now, like I say, if you're like going to have them as their own, you would normally pour melted butter over them. We're not going to do that. Only because the wife was saying, I'm not doing that. Too fatty. But it is just essentially cooked pasta. Not sure they look like little sparrows, but it's just pasta. Knockadiddle, spätzle. It's up to you. If you were going to just have them with butter, you might want to have brown butter, you know, make it a little bit nutty. Chicken Paprikash. So, let's put some chicken on there, and then spoon some sauce over the spätzle. Okay, and there is our chicken paprikash, or paprika hendel, if you're referring to old Jonathan Harker in the original Bram Stoker Dracula. So what I'm going to do to start with, I'm going to have some of that spätzle in that sauce, which is probably that is nice. It's salty. Unlike Jonathan Harker's version, it's not making me have a thirst. Well, it don't take much to get me to have a thirst. But let's just try the chicken, which is nicely well cooked and sort of semi-falling apart. That's a bit hot because it's been boiling away now. Oh, but add a bit more squeezy. But that sweet paprika hasn't made it like hot. Well, it is just very, very tasty. So, let me get that off, put my mask back on. Can't eat this on. Bloody teeth getting away. But that is your chicken paprikash. Enjoy your last meal. Before I come and visit you for my probably not last meal.